Welcome to Lessons in Dyslexic Thinking, conversations with the world's most inspiring dyslexics, where we find out what dyslexic thinking is and how each of us can employ it to change the world. Today I'm joined by Roy Schwartz, the co-founder of Axios and author of the best-selling book Smart Brevity. Roy, together with your co-founders, you've written the definitive guide to communicating simply and clearly, my favourite dyslexic thinking skill. Roy, I'm really fascinated to chat with you and learn about this, so it's great that you could join us today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So let's kick off with the most important question of all. Tell us about your dyslexic thinking and how you think it helps you to do what you do.
Yes, I would say it is simplifying complex ideas. I didn't realize it was a strength of mine until I entered the business world, and then all of a sudden I realized, I can take complex information, simplify it down, and be able to share it with other people. And so that became my superpower, but it took me years to figure it out. It wasn't until I was in the business world that I was like, this is what I do really well.
And tell us what your process is like. How do you take lots of complex ideas and simplify them? Because people find that really tricky to do.
Yeah, I mean, usually if it's in a meeting, it's a lot of listening, it's a lot of note taking, even though I don't actually ever refer back to my notes because I can't read my handwriting. But I take the notes, it allows me to remember the things that I find most important. And then I'm able to take a few minutes, put it all together. And then usually I'll ask in the meeting, do I have this right? Is this how you would put this if I was to summarize it? And that usually helps other people in the room, but it also helps me say, okay, that's exactly the idea or the concept that we're trying to get to.
And you wrote the best-selling book, Smart Brevity. Can you explain the concept behind that?
Sure. Well, actually, it even goes back to why we created Axios. So when we were at Politico, Jim and Mike founded Politico. I came in about a year later, and this is back when there were only 50 employees, very small company. And we were there for a decade. But over that time, we had all of this data from the web, and we could see that people were reading less and scanning more. And in fact, right as I was leaving, the number that really spoke to me was that 80% of people stopped reading after 250 words. To give you some sense, the average article is 1,000 words. So it would be if Netflix did a show and it lasted an hour and people only watched 15 minutes, they would never make the other 45 minutes. But yet news organizations just keep churning out 1,000-word articles. And I spoke to my friends at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. It was the same across the board. People stopped reading after 250 words. We were trying to figure out, why is that? What's happening? And we realized that people were overwhelmed. You get 300 emails plus a day, you get text messages, you might get Slack or team messages, you get real news, you get fake news. And so you're overwhelmed. And so you're trying to get caught up on information, but it's really hard to do. And so that was the insight that launched Axios, the idea of how do we give people news and information in what ended up being called Smart Brevity, this new format, and how do we do it in the most concise way possible. And 250 words happens to be the number of words that fit on one screen of your phone. And so we realized, people want one screen of information, maybe if they want to go deeper, 2 screens of information. So we basically put everything into what's new and why does it matter? And very quickly we realized this is bigger than news. This is actually how people should communicate in this modern era, and that's why we wrote the book.
And it's absolutely exactly how dyslexics like to communicate and like to receive information as well. Why do you think dyslexics do make such great communicators?
They have to simplify things. So my dad is dyslexic, my son is dyslexic, I'm dyslexic, my wife's dad is dyslexic. And what I've realized is that they all take a complex conversation, a complex theory, they boil it down into something that anyone can understand. And I can't use complicated language. I can't use, in the US it would be SAT words, probably in the UK it would be GCSE words, but I can't use words that are not used in everyday conversation. And actually that's one of the insights in the book, is that when people sit down and write, for whatever reason, they tend to use language that you would never use if you and I were just having a conversation, grabbing some coffee or some tea. And so words like aforementioned, which if you saw it written, you wouldn't think twice about it. But if I said that to you while we were just having tea, you'd say, "What, like, why would he use that language?" So we tell people use simple language, and I think dyslexic people use simple language innately.
Yeah, and I think also that the idea of reading something back to see whether it sounds like you would have said it is actually such brilliant advice.
Yeah, we tell everyone, as one of the chapters in the book, read it out loud. Write out what you're going to say. Think about the audience first. Think about who you're writing it for, and think about them as the audience. Are they going to be bored by this? Are they going to be interested by it? If you're bored by it when you read it back, you've not cut out enough. You need to really condense it down.
All dyslexics have a different pattern of strengths and challenges. Simplifying is clearly one of your strengths. Tell us about your challenges and how you work around them.
So I can't spell anything. I can't understand grammar, and I've tried very, very hard to do both, and I still can't do it. To give you some sense of my spelling challenges, sometimes they're so bad that spell check doesn't know what word I'm trying to use. So I have to actually go and use Google and put it in a sentence in order to get it. And there's some words that baffle me because I feel like I'm smart. I know a lot of things, but yet I can't spell the word exercise. I can't spell the word entrepreneurship. And so often I have to try and find a different word because I can't spell it at the time, and I don't have the time to, go look it up. So I'll just try and use a different word. So that's been a challenge. And especially when you're in media and journalism and I'm writing to other people who are professional writers, I'm always concerned that I'm not doing a good job, or that someone is realizing that I can't spell or can't write correctly. So that's been very difficult. But luckily, I think things are moving in the right direction for dyslexics in the sense of AI, spell check, grammar check. All of those things are starting to be corrected automatically, which is great.
So how important is it for dyslexics to be open about their dyslexia in the workplace?
I think it's very important. I've never tried to hide it. I've always talked about it openly. There's a chapter in the book all about my dyslexia and how the teacher that was grading my report said, "Do you not own a thesaurus or a dictionary? Why are you making so many errors?" And I think it's important that people understand what dyslexia is. I wasn't aware really until you and I talked that it was so prevalent, that 20% of people had dyslexia. I always thought, okay, I'm the only person in the room that has this. But when my son started going to school and had hundreds of kids that all had dyslexia, I was like, wow, this is really special. And they could all be open about it. And so I think the more people we can encourage to be open about it, the better.
And I think we do know that still 80% of dyslexics leave school without their dyslexia being identified. So often in the workplace, people don't know. And one brilliant way of spotting them is through their spelling, because there'll just be that sort of random spelling error popping in there somewhere. Let me take you back to your school days. When did you find out that you were dyslexic?
So I don't think we got the official diagnosis probably until I was 9 or 10. I think until then, people just thought I was stupid. I wouldn't amount to much. So teachers would see that you couldn't spell, see that you couldn't write, see that you couldn't read very well, and would just think, oh, that person isn't smart. And I felt that way really until I got into college. And so even though I was diagnosed with dyslexia and I went through some courses, it never really fully corrected it. You never overcome it, but you learn to live with it, and eventually you learn the strengths. I learned that too late, I think. I'm excited that my son, who is now only 13, understands that there are strengths associated with dyslexia. And so I think he'll be much further along. And I hope that for lots of dyslexic children. And it's discouraging that 80% of people graduate from school and don't know that they have dyslexia.
And dyslexics are graduating from school not realizing that they have these amazing strengths that are so super important in the world. So what do you think your 7-year-old self would think about what you're doing now?
Would be incredibly shocked and surprised that I'm in media or journalism. Even though I'm on the business side, the thought that I would be in that industry, would shock and surprise me, just because it's so oriented around writing and communicating. I think also the success that I've had. I will say that I was always very determined, very ambitious, but I always felt constrained. And so once I let that go, suddenly things started to happen. And I think in many ways I was holding myself back because I felt that, well, this is the best that I can do. This is the biggest accomplishment that I can have. And the moment I freed myself from constraining my limits, I've been able to do a lot better.
And what would your 3 tips be for cutting through the noise when you're communicating? The top 3 tips.
Sure. I would say 1, say it out loud. So what you and I talked about earlier, when you read something that you're about to send, an email or an important report, and you read it out loud, it will tell you if you're using good enough language, basic enough language. Is it memorable? Is it sharp? Is it concise? All of that will come through when you read it out loud. 2 is have a specific person in mind as the audience. So especially when you're writing an email that's going to go out to, I write to the entire company. But I'll usually think of one person, not the most well-informed person, not the least informed person, but someone who represents the majority of the organization. And I try and think of it as if I'm talking to that person. And so does my writing, does that email in this case, will it resonate with them? Will they feel like I'm writing it for them? And will they want to read it and be able to get through it? And then when you go through it, is it concise enough? Have you cut out all of the unnecessary language? For whatever reason, it's a bug in humanity. We sit down, we start writing, and everything we do is long. And we're trained that way from school. How many times do we get assignments that said, we want 3 pages of this or 5 pages of this? And so we all played with the margins and played with the ways to make that font larger and have as few words as possible. It should have been the other way around. It should have said, take this complex theory, this complex observation, and try and make it as concise as possible. Try and have smart brevity. And that's why that book, we've written it in that way. But I think if people could do that, that's a real skill. Anyone can fill up 5 pages of nonsense. Can you actually get it down to a single paragraph, a few sentences? That's the real skill.
If you had one piece of advice for dyslexics, young and old, what would it be?
If you know you have dyslexia, I think you've already made a lot of progress. So you're aware of it. Now it's about reading about people like Richard Branson and other successful dyslexic people to see that you don't have to be limited. And in fact, understanding that strength, understanding that superpower, the ability to solve puzzles. I play a lot of chess with my son, and he's great at chess. He's better at chess than his older brother. And his older brother is a more traditional kid, does really well in school and didn't have any problems reading or writing. And yet my younger son can beat him in chess, beat him in Monopoly. And that's because he has the ability to think very strategically and can think several moves ahead. And I think that is all due to the dyslexia. So I point that out to him to say, here are the upsides. And so I think understanding the upsides allows you to develop skills around the downside, manage the downside, and not beat yourself up for not being able to read as well, not being able to spell as well as other people.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
This podcast is sponsored by Microsoft, who, like us, are passionate about empowering dyslexic thinking. Their free tool, Immersive Reader, helps every dyslexic with reading and comprehension. Find out more by clicking the Microsoft link in the podcast notes. And if you'd like to find out more about what dyslexic thinking skills are and how to recognise them in schools, at work or at home, you can take our free training now. Empowering Dyslexic Thinking in Schools, available on Microsoft Learn, and Empowering Dyslexic Thinking at Work, available on LinkedIn Learning. And please subscribe so you don't miss out on future lessons in dyslexic thinking.